This is Ross Feingold on the Taiwan Hashtag program, coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan, hosted by Storm Media Group. We are finally here. After months of intense campaigning by Tsai Ing-Wen, the incumbent president, Han Kuo-yu, mayor of Kaohsiung, and the candidate of the Kuomintang, and People First Party candidate James Song-Chu-yu, tomorrow is finally Election Day. Taiwan's voters will be voting for the president as well as all 113 members of Taiwan's parliament, known as the Legislative Yuan. So going into the election, what were the polls looking like for the three presidential candidates? Let's take a look. Here's the latest polling data. Actually, we cannot talk about the polls. Taiwan has a law that prevents us from doing so. There is a quiet cooling off period for 10 days before the election. We cannot talk about the polls at all. You want to know about the polls? Look at the previous episodes of our program. So, no polls, who's going to win? We don't know, but we do know that the candidates in recent days leading up to the election have been running all over Taiwan, north, central, south. In some cities, they've had very large rallies. In fact, here in Taipei City on Thursday, Han Kuo-yu. Friday night, it was Tsai Ing-Wen's turn. Downtown rallies near the presidential office, the usual music, large crowds, a lot of flags being waved, especially for the Han Kuo-yu campaign, because they're the ones that make more use of the symbolism of the Republic of China, traditionally associated with the Kuomintang and not associated with the Minjindang. What are the candidates talking about in the final days of the election campaign? Well, there's been a lot of mudslinging. So very negative campaigning on both sides. Sometimes a lot of the things they say just aren't true. That's good for the lawyers. So a lot of lawsuits are being filed by different candidates or different parties as the mudslinging worsens. A lot of accusations about Han Kuo-yu's personal behavior, his finances, potential extramarital affairs, things like that. Will it hurt him on Saturday, tomorrow? We just don't know. On the Kuomintang side, or opponents of president's side, they continue to talk about things like her doctoral or PhD thesis and questions about the honesty of the submission, whether or not it even was actually submitted. They criticize President Tsai's handling of several corruption cases that occurred, including the cigarette smuggling case that happened just this past summer, the nepotism that has occurred, the hiring of friends and relatives of party officials to various jobs in government. And on the Tsai side, they seem to return to one significant issue more than any other, more than the economy, more than Han Kuo-yu's personal behavior. It's about China. It's about Hong Kong. So constant return to, if you elect Han Kuo-yu in the Kuomintang, he supports the 1992 consensus. Tsai Ing-Wen says, actually, the 92 consensus is the equivalent of one country, two systems, and it doesn't work in Hong Kong. Look what's happened in Hong Kong. So Tsai Ing-Wen campaigning very heavily on the Hong Kong angle right up until the final days of the election. We've seen even television commercials or YouTube advertisements by supporters of Tsai Ing-Wen that go very heavy on this theme, very emotional, showing images of the protests in Hong Kong and juxtaposing that against the peaceful democracy we have here in Taiwan. Will that help President Tsai get reelected on Saturday? We'll find out in about 24 hours. But as far as the election process goes, peaceful, right? As I said, Taiwan is a very peaceful democracy. There was one significant incident of political violence a few weeks ago in late December. There was a bombing outside a Kuomintang office in Tainan, and then the police had to fire over 100 rounds to arrest the suspect when he was holed up in an apartment. But generally, election day here in Taiwan should be peaceful. We wouldn't expect any kind of violence. Losers, the supporters of the loser side, they sometimes get angry and protest. Maybe they'll even throw some food at the candidate who lost. It's happened before. Supporters of the winning candidate will, of course, be exuberant. There will be outdoor celebrations around candidate headquarters, whether for Legislative Yuan candidates or for the presidential candidates. So that's certainly something to watch as well. You'll see a lot of images of that in international media, tens of thousands of people congregating outside the candidate headquarters. The legislative yuan, Taiwan's parliament, it's also anyone's guess. There was almost no reliable polling data given the nature of how the members of the legislative yuan are elected. Most of them are elected in single-member constituencies. Some are elected off of the party list. Voters in Taiwan tomorrow, 3 ballots. Why 3 ballots? 1 for president, 1 for your legislative yuan constituency member, 1 for the legislative yuan political party vote. So again, the second way that members of the legislative yuan are elected is based on the party vote, voting off the party list. Will the DPP maintain the majority that it won in 2016? Very difficult. If you look at the results of the 2018 election, people are very disappointed with the DPP. Hard to imagine that they would get that same level of enormous support on the legislative yuan side, even if Tsai Ing-Wen is elected president. There's a third party formed by Mayor Kuo-yu of Taipei, the Taiwan People's First Party. People expect them to break the 5% threshold to get into the legislative yuan. The other 2 minority parties that are in the legislative yuan, the New Power Party, People First Party, they might also get the 5% again. Looks more likely that the New Power Party will, a little more difficult for the People First Party. But the presence of these third parties might go a long way to ensuring that the DPP does not have a majority, or it might have a very small majority, or they might be the largest party, but again, not a majority. Of course, the Kuomintang hopes that they'll have the majority. It's kind of their backup plan. If Tsai Ing-wen wins the presidency, maybe we could be the majority in the legislative yuan. Who knows? Again, it's very hard to plot this out. The polling data completely unreliable pre-election. When will the results be out? Well, voting begins at 8 a.m., ends at 4 p.m. Is it electronic ballots? People ask me, is it voting machines? No, it's not. It's paper ballots. The voters have to check off. Then they put it in a box. The boxes get opened up. The residents of the nearby, the local polling station, they could watch this process. It's very transparent. Voting fraud that happened in the past decades ago here in Taiwan usually doesn't happen. There should not be any ballot box stuffing. Don't expect that to occur. Sometimes people receive cash to vote for a certain candidate. There's a little bit of that. But there shouldn't be any funny stuff with the actual ballots that are cast in the polling stations tomorrow, or with the counting, because it is very open to the public. People could observe the opening of the boxes and the counting and the tabulating of the ballots. It's done by hand and then is fed into a computer system. Based on past experience, the results are available very, very fast. We're talking how fast? 3-4 hours maybe? 5 hours at most by 9 p.m. unless it's a very close election. 2004 election, President Chen Shui-bian was reelected by a margin of less than 30,000 votes, so out of the approximately 13 million votes cast. Talk about a razor-thin election victory. Then the result was disputed by the Kuomintang candidates. There was litigation, went on for months, but eventually the court said, sorry, we can't do anything about this. So Chen Shui-bian continued into his second term. So there is that small possibility of a close vote, and the result could not be readily available within a few hours, or it could take a long time if there's any disputes, litigation that results. But absent of razor-thin close election, the results should be available probably by 8-9 p.m. Taipei time on Saturday night. Based on previous election, the losing candidate would make a concession speech, and then the winning candidate will make a concession speech. They'll talk a little bit about what they plan to do during their presidency. They'll thank the voters, of course. Probably won't say much about the losing side, given how negative the campaign has become. So watch out for that. Those of you watching international media, you could tune in probably around 9-10 p.m. Taipei time on Saturday, so early morning East Coast, U.S. time, midday in Europe, and that's when the results will be available. Just like with the presidential election, legislative yuan counting should go very, very quickly as well. There's usually enough staff at polling stations to be able to simultaneously tabulate the presidential and the legislative yuan votes quickly, even if they open one up and ahead of the other. They'll do all this very, very quickly. So we'll also know the outcome of the legislative yuan election on Saturday night, again, subject to any really close races or any races that require a recount. But the results, whether for the president or the legislative event, we should know by Saturday night. And then where do we go from here? Well, we'll be watching for China's reaction, of course. Tsai Ing-wen is reelected. We would expect China to say some pretty strong things about their view on the future of Taiwan-China relations. They'll probably accuse her of manipulating the voters or making use of Hong Kong and make some other nasty threats about their policies towards Tsai Ing-wen's government. If Han Kuo-yu is elected, I would expect China to say that there'll be a new era in cross-strait relations and the people of Taiwan have rejected the policies of the DPP. We'll also be looking for the reaction from foreign governments, whether the United States, Japan, European Union governments in Southeast Asia. Typically, they'll issue some kind of congratulatory statement. They'll say, we respect the will of the voters. It's so great that there's a democracy in Taiwan, regardless of who wins. In fact, just earlier this week, the State Department in the United States, they reiterated they're not taking sides in this election. They don't favor any of the candidates over the others. Some people doubt that, though. It seems that the United States does have a very good relationship with Tsai Ing-wen and would hope that she gets reelected to another 4-year term. But again, we'll be looking for the reactions from the foreign governments as well. And then there'll be the reaction from the foreign media as journalists who've flown into Taiwan to cover this story, write their reports about the election result. Unfortunately, there's a lot of inaccuracy in English language reporting about Taiwan. We've talked about some of that on previous programs. We'll probably talk about that on future programs after the election, at least in the few days following the election. And then life will go on. That's the important thing to remember. Whoever wins this election in Taiwan will have a mandate from the voters, and then they will have to deliver on that. So whether it's Tsai Ing-wen in a second term or Han Kuo-yu in a first term, the voters have high expectations because that's the nature of democracy, and Taiwan remains a democracy. I'm Ross Feingold. You've been watching Taiwan Hashtag on Storm Media. Watch us next week for the post-election analysis.